and Development Associate at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, JINSA, in Washington, D.C., where she works on initiatives focused on U.S.-Israel security cooperation and regional stability. She recently completed a master's in security studies at Georgetown University. And also, she has a specialization in technology and security. Originally, she's from Germany, and she spent years studying at the Reichman University in Israel, focusing on counter-terrorism and security studies, focusing sides. And as well, she lived, studied, and worked across Europe, Israel, and the United States. And she brings a perspective on security, resilience, and especially resistance and the social impact of conflict. Now, we also get to talk with Tal today, who is a founder and president of the International Diplomacy Initiatives. He works at the intersection of international engagement, parliamentary affairs, and youth leadership. He holds an LL.B. and BA in government, foreign affairs, and strategy from Reichman University, and has gained experience across the US Congress, the European Parliament, NATO, and the Israeli Knesset. His work is mainly focused on legislative research, institutional analysis, and we're happy to have him on site giving us today a very interesting perspective on his perception and view on how resilience should be managed. So thank you very much, guys, for being here today. And me and Savannah are going to moderate this call. We're going to have a couple of questions, and feel free to introduce us as well as you feel like in the topic.
Yep, thank you, Patricia. And once again, thank you both for being here. We're really excited to be able to speak with you today. So just going straight into some of the questions, Tal, our first question is for you, and we wanted to ask, how have the military actions kind of affected your day-to-day life?
Thank you for the question. Great to be here. So basically, there's no day-to-day life or daily routine during a war. And the resilience part of it is trying to find a routine, a daily schedule. It comes and goes by the intensity of the war. So in wars, with Iran back in March, when we had 40 days of non-stop missiles on Israel, we didn't sleep at the night as well, because during the night, so you don't have any daily routine. So we can say that, workplaces were closed, education, everything. And it was way worse back in June with the war with Iran. And you just try to grasp what you'll do the next day, because basically everyone are at home. But let's say there's no day-to-day life. So back in October 7, when the war started, I was still studying university. It was postponed for a few months, then it was started, and so on. So I don't think I had a daily schedule for the last 3 years. We just try to, you cannot really plan ahead, because it all depends on, what basically Trump these days will say, or decide, and that's it. So I want to, emphasize the day-to-day life, but I'm trying to think, what is my day-to-day life in these last 3 years? We try to grasp on all the little things, if it's to go to work when you can, or to work on little projects, and not actually plan for long terms in a way. That's how I see it. Yeah, can continue.
That's very interesting. It's very interesting, and this helps us go a bit and dive into the second question, which is for you both, regarding the moment in which you started feeling the effects of the conflict. usually, and the parts of it which you experience, how has that been exacerbated in the recent Israel-Iranian conflicts? How did you see it, or how did you get to have the perception of it and also feel its effects?
Lidia, you want to?
Okay. I'm going to go first, but also before I start answering the questions, I just want to make sure to distinguish between my perspective and Tal's, because Tal can really speak from the lived reality on the ground in Israel. And my perspective comes from Washington. So I'm looking at it from a little bit of a removed point of view, as well as a more strategic lens, just because I'm working more on the policy side of this. And I just want to make sure that people that listen to this or watch this keep it in mind as Tal and I answer the questions. But when it comes to the effect of the conflict, so for me, the effect of the conflict began immediately on October 7th. I was not in Israel physically at the time, but I have family and close friends there. And I'd spent significant time living in the country. And so many people with strong ties to Israel, and I spend those first days really trying to understand who was safe, what was happening, whether the people we cared about had been affected, to what extent they'd been affected. And what struck me very quickly was that October 7th was not experienced as a distant national tragedy. In Israel, people are remarkably interconnected, and I think a lot of people internationally don't fully understand the intensity of that. So people often say that everyone is only a few degrees of separation, 1 or 2 degrees of separation from one another in Israel, and there is a lot of truth to that. So what happens to one community or one person is often felt by the entire country. And so I think that's also a level of, grief and just working through those first early days that was hard for other people to empathize with. And then when I arrived to Georgetown in January 2024, the effects of the conflict really became even more tangible because I was serving as a co-president of the Jewish Graduate Student Association. And then suddenly I found myself, helping and supporting a community that was processing grief and anxiety and uncertainty and anti-Semitism on campus. And so many students were carrying personal connections to the conflict while also navigating a really charged public debate around everything that was going on. And so more recently, the escalation involving Iran has amplified many of those feelings, I feel like, because it reinforces a reality that many Israelis have understood for years, that a conflict is not only confined to a single front. Because what began with Hamas on October 7th quickly became connected to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, and other Iranian proxies, and eventually to this direct confrontation with Iran. So I feel like it's just learning from everything that has happened in the past 2.5 years and trying to figure out how to go forward. I think one thing about resilience is that it's not about becoming numb to the events that are happening, because if you're constantly, everybody that lives in Israel has been under this shadow of war for the past 2.5 years, if not longer. And it is about continuing to work and study and try to lead a normal life, as Tal said, while planning for a future that's super uncertain. And I think those are very real challenges that only people on the ground can kind of explain. And that's why I'm happy Tal is joining us today.
Thank you. So I will give my input on the matter. So on October 7, I live next to Tel Aviv. So, we got siren, as it happened back in 2019, I think, as well in 2014, when we had conflicts with Hamas in Gaza. And you think it just, oh, they shot a missile at 7 something, it was in the morning, 7:20 something. You see, I still remember it. And you think, okay, you go to sleep, but it was more than that. We opened TVs and we started to see the slaughter and everything that unfolded for many hours after. And as Lidia said, we all know people were affected, people were killed, people were kidnapped, families of them, even my university, family of friends. So you cannot really get away from it, even if you try to. So that's the reality we've been living in different levels, because it's different cycles of the war. It got more intense when Hezbollah joined, of course, the Houthis and others, and then one of them stops and the other continues. Then the wars with Iran. So yes, resilience in all of that is to think on, you can't really plan long term. Even when you plan a vacation or to go abroad or somewhere, the flights can get cancelled. You're not sure what will happen. But as I said, you try to break it into, little daily, I think, or weekly things that you can do. But it's an ongoing thing. I don't think us as Israelis, we still had the time to even process what we've been going through, because the war is not over. It continues, different, as I said, different levels, different areas. And yeah, so with Iran, it was worse because, in a way, for us, because it's bigger missiles, they just shoot at civilian cities, and you can see our whole block just get destroyed. And I have friends who their houses were hit by Iranian rocket, and and then you try to cope with that. But that's the reality we've been living in for the last. For me, it's already it's 2 years something. But yeah, that's the situation.
Thank you for those answers and for offering also that distinguishment between on the ground and the Washington perspective. I think that's a really valuable but distinguished point of view that we can bring into this discussion. Going back to you, Tal, when you hear about the international news coverage about what's happening in Israel, does it reflect the on-the-ground reality? Does it kind of cover that?
Not at all, in my opinion. And we saw it even in this conflict more than former conflict in Gaza. We're living in reality when people don't have a bigger attention span than Reels in Instagram and TikToks, and I'm in the same situation. So a lot of what we see, let's say international news, it's a lot of time I see it as one-sided, and I'm Israeli, I'm Jewish, I cannot speak in name of any Palestinian, so I'm speaking just on behalf of myself. So in this way, I feel personally that a lot of time the international news have been wrongly covering a lot of things that are going on here. And of course, that the idea of the news in the end of the day is to get more viewers, and they try to write a narrative. And I'm not saying that everything that's reported by international news is false. I'm just saying it feels like sometimes there's a bigger focus on Israel in general than whatever is going in the world, around the world. And of course, you see the international news and we see social media. Yeah, it's not easy. So I've been watching, international news coverage forever, and some with social media. So it's been really hard to see that, they sometimes try to take one incident without, researching what happened actually in the background, just to make, a nice notification to send in the news apps, or a nice title. And then when you read inside, you say, okay, that's has nothing to do with the title, or it has nothing, what's the news here, what really happened. So I don't know if it's either like a way of the news to make more content for themselves rather than, you know, actually fact checking, and what are the sources that you're using for what you're reporting, and you know, journalists so-called who have some you know, problematic backgrounds are the real, you know, sources that we need to rely on. So it seems that the scrutiny on news when it's covered on Israel is less scrutiny in a way of like, oh, we're not fact checking, we're not checking all of this stuff just in order to report what's going on. And for me, it was difficult to see a lot of times what's being written and how it was covered. Sometimes with one incident that happened somewhere, you can see all coverage of, oh, this is systematic, is happening over and over again, and there's no even proof for that. Yeah, that's the situation.
I think it's really interesting to see how much something like that can affect you. And I think being there is one of the toughest positions to have, and to feel everything changing just like that overnight, or even like you having different fears of how this could really be, or if it's true or not. And where this makes me go, and what it makes me think is just at an institutional level, Lydia, how does the mainstream international news coverage reflect the ongoing work and the findings? How do you see this, and like what's the perspective you've seen through your experience?
I think a lot of the things I'll be saying are kind of echoing what Tal has said. There are two separate challenges in like the mainstream media landscape, in my opinion. One is that every media ecosystem is biased because it comes from like those biases are not always political. They might be cultural, they can be structural. News organizations are incentivized to focus on what's visible, what's immediate, and especially what's emotionally compelling. And so strategic considerations, intelligence assessment, and like long-term planning are often not part of what's being communicated in the first place. And so the second challenge, I think, is that during active military operations, there is almost always a huge gap between what the public is allowed to know and what decision makers know, because a lot of the military intelligence and intergovernmental like information is classified and can't be shared in real time. So a lot of the information about the actual operations, why, when, where, etc., is being communicated after the fact. And so as someone who, you know, studies security issues and now works in national security space, I have learned to be really cautious about drawing definitive like conclusions based on solely information available in the first couple hours after an event. The public is often seeing only a portion of the picture, like literally probably 10% sometimes. And that doesn't mean that journalists are acting in bad faith always, but it means that reporting is constrained by so many different like aspects. And especially also in conflict situation by what can be verified and what is publicly disclosed. And then another aspect is also in order for like the difference between significant information environments during a conflict and the historical understanding of it emerges like months and months after the fact, when you have the operational details and the intelligence assessments and the decision-making process becomes more public. And so that's truly the only time where you have probably still not like a full scope of information, but a lot more to work with. So basically, I would say mainstream coverage is an important source of information because that's obviously how all of us get our, you know, morning news, but it is rarely the complete picture. And I think people need to be aware of that. And especially in wartime, the information you're getting on a day-to-day, like breaking news, is never going to be complete. And I think just like having the understanding that that's the case and taking every, bit of news with a grain of salt, and at the end being able to like put the picture together is kind of how these challenges can be handled on like an individual level, I think.
Thank you. And it's interesting that you both mentioned of how it's not, the mainstream news coverage is never going to get the complete picture, whether on the boots or from an institutional perspective. One of the more publicized aspects, though, of the conflict is the US involvement, and there seems to be something in the news about that changing every other day with the policies, the level of involvement happening, things just happening. How have these US policies or involvement in the region been felt from your perspective as individuals living through and with work focused on this conflict? And this is a question we have for both of you.
I'll go ahead.
Thank you for the question. So for me, it's clearly as an Israeli and for Israel that, we are allies of the US, and I'm very happy of the US involvement in the region. Israel and the US worked like tremendously together in amazing ways, especially during the last war with Iran, and even the one in June. And I'm happy for that. We need to be careful in Israel to see that, US and Israel are different countries, that everything that is happening is in Israel's interest as well, because we live here in this region, and the US is our best ally, but they have their own interest as well, in a way of like, we need to see that actually the end result will align with Israel's interest. And the US are back in a way to the Middle East. I don't see any other big involvement of other, let's say, superpowers. If we can see the EU, we can't really see the EU as a whole superpower, but I'm saying if we see countries in the EU, they are not really involved in the Middle East. They try to push themselves as France in Lebanon and others, and it doesn't really work in a way. So I'm happy that at least there is a superpower, a good ally that we can rely on to work with, and to work with on matters that deal with our core values and what threaten us together. Because the thing with Iran, for example, is not just a threat on Israel, it's a threat of, on Israel, but also on other US allies in the region, if we speak about, say, the Saudis or the Gulf countries and so on. And that's the reason the US is here as well, to secure all of their interests. So I'm happy with that. I don't see any problem with that. Yeah. Lidia?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I think the challenge with how the US-Israeli relationship is being discussed globally is that it's always, or mostly, in political terms. But there's so much more, like the relationship is built on so much deeper cooperation, and practical cooperation between the militaries, between policymakers, between researchers and institutions. And these like cooperative ecosystems have existed for decades. So a lot of the times when, like tension rises and conflict arises, the US-Israeli relationship becomes a huge topic in the news and in media and in all the debates. And I think, and obviously there is a political aspect to it for sure, but I think that sometimes in those debates, the like fundamental value systems and the fundamental levels of cooperation are being, cut short, not ignored, but cut short. And at the same time, I do think that like when there is conflict, as Tal mentioned, there's a really challenging balance for policymakers that they're facing, because governments have to think about, their immediate security needs, the long-term regional stability, humanitarian concerns, and deterrence. And those objectives oftentimes don't align perfectly, especially if you're, if you have two different countries cooperating on such a like close military level. I will say, as Tal said, the like military operation during the Iran war was incredible. I think it's going to be something that will be studied later on, because I don't think we've ever seen such a like close and seamless like military operation being conducted by two countries. And obviously, the objectives are not always aligned, but I think the US and Israel do an incredible job of communicating between the countries, and therefore I believe that both countries' needs and objectives are being, presented well.
I think that's really important. And what I've seen that you also pointed out was the factor of cooperating and cooperation per se. So seeing the dynamics being like that and constantly changing, and one never knows what to concretely expect. I think a relevant point here is also when it comes to the day-to-day life. So if we were kind of to switch onto the education factor, what do you guys think are the biggest challenges you faced in continuing your right to education? And I think this is something that Tal could answer as well. But like, also, how have you seen even universities adapting throughout the several months, the past months at least?
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask what right of education in a way, because universities were closed. I have friends who went to the battlefield, were and are students like me, were to stop the studies of law. We were law students. You have people in the north and in the south that be transferred to other places within Israel. So schools were closed for tens of thousands of people, or even more in Israel. So it's a bigger thing, not just our education, but the right of education of people in Israel that didn't really exist in a way, because if universities are closed for months for security reasons, and people, primary school students cannot go safely to the schools even these days in the north of Israel because of the drone attacks by Hezbollah. So in the hierarchy of rights, education is not really, we don't really get it in a way, the right to education, for security reasons. So of course, things have moved. We've learned from COVID times to these platforms, from Zoom to other platforms to try to study. It's not the same. We've enrolled to university to meet people, to experience university, and it was really stopped because people were students were in the battlefield. Students were helping their families if they were not in the battlefields. So a lot of adjustments were made by the different systems, by universities, for students. We have students where their family were killed in October 7, or in the battlefield and other places. So there was more openness in a way of finding ways to help them finish their studies from our institutions, so from universities or other institutions in Israel. So we did everything we could and still can to get education. So, for example, kids who cannot study in primary schools in the north will be integrated into another school in the center of Israel, but then, you cannot move kids each year from different schools. It doesn't work like this way, in a social way. So it's been difficult. It's not easy, and it's still going, in different parts of Israel. So that's the situation. Yeah. We can't hear you.
Patricia, you're muted.
Yeah, I was trying to say that I think it's really intense to go through things like this. And I feel like it's even painful to have to remember like how it feels to go through everything. I think this applies generally to people going through the situations of conflict, and what it's special difficulties being young, having to deal with this, because usually you would hear grandparents talking about this or historians. When I was young, I had to go through this. And now, funny thing, some of us have to go through that, and we're lucky enough, anyways, to be able to have a good perspective on it, and be able to like understand also what is causing this. So basically, how have you seen different reactions around you? Like, I think Savannah would have to point out right now about the other folks that are next to you. What do you think is their point and response compared to your own?
Yeah,
I
and
think-
specific. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say you're kind of in a unique position of where you're a student as well, but you also are a young professional as well and have been experiencing in this kind of work. And this is a position that most of our fellows are in as well, where many of us are continuing our education, but still conducting some kind of professional works in the hope of shaping and building out a future. So in both kind of this university perspective, but also as a young professional trying to kind of carve out a career and a future for themselves, in adjusting to all of these changes, what have been the responses from your fellow students, but also your fellow colleagues and peers within these spaces?
Lidia, you want to say something, or I should say?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So as I said before, I was not in reserves during the war. I was helping in other ways, but I have friends who've been months in wars, and fighting, leaving behind girlfriends, family, quitting jobs because they have to fight. And that's the situation of really good friends of mine, I haven't, and the thing is, and for my side, just checking that they are okay, and if I can do anything for my side, if the family needs support, or they want something, some sweets sent to the battlefield for them to have during, when they, just resting. So yeah, so from young professionals as well, you had a lot of people who had, to recalculate, or, because a lot of businesses were closed, so a lot of businesses have failed in Israel because of the war, because everyone are, back to the apartments. A lot of businesses were not allowed to be open, just necessities like supermarkets and medical institutes and so on for a long time. So a lot of people all over Israel have recalculated the perspectives or what to do, and I had to do the same all the time. With our NGO, which is international, and we have people in Israel and Germany and other places, and all over Europe. So a lot of activities moved from Israel to Europe, and we've started to build more of Europe. But also in Israel, when you start to, we do activities for diplomats, and the amount of times I've been with ambassadors and diplomats in bomb shelters, and even I'm a good friend of the Romanian embassy in Israel. So even they experience the situation as well from a perspective. Yes, even your diplomats here, the local diplomats, have to experience this, and them themselves have to change their day-to-day life. So I'm saying, everyone on the ground here have to recalculate and see And then, of course, I'm speaking about the people on the front because they are the ones who are fighting and risking their lives. And, you know, really have to change their day to day. For me, it's like if to stay at home next to a bomb shelter or go to work where I have bomb shelter there. But for them, it's like, you know, we are, you know, people with young kids were killed, you know, no need to start to say all the stories. But yeah, for them, you know, I cannot speak in the name of them. I'm not a combat soldier, but I'm saying I have a lot of friends who are combats, and I see the hardships they've been going through. As most of Israel has been going through it. So it's, you know, a lot of them are now young lawyers, and same, you know, they have to go to reserve duty, so they have to stop everything and go. And that's, you know, that's the situation for fellow students who saw other students get killed. You know, some of them were at the Nova Festival and other events. Yeah, so that's the reality we're living in when you try to live your plan a week ahead, maybe if you succeed to go through the week ahead. And then you know that people around you, everyone is going through something in life, but the reality is that, you know, people have been going through a lot. And we just take into consideration, you can't know if the person you're speaking to has been now 2 months fighting, you know, somewhere, and just came back for a weekend with his family. So when you see people in the street as well, you know, it's like, be nicer than usual to everyone. Yeah.
If I could just add something, because obviously I'm not on the ground. I went back for a month last summer, and I think from a more, because Tal was talking a lot about like the individual perspective and like how individuals are dealing with, you know, the situation. But I think as a society, I mean, you have a society that has basically been, you know, trying to operate in a like wartime situation, at least in the past 2.5 years. It has put incredible strain on the economy, on society, because you have people that have been, you know, that are reservists. They have normal jobs, they have their families, they have their kids on the way, whatever, who have been called in for duty and have served more than like 400, 500 days in active duty since October 7th, 2023. And so that is just something, it doesn't only affect like the young people or the students. It really is like people that have established careers and whatever, like are being called in because we need people that are, you know, serving in active duty. And so I think that will be something down the line that like Israeli society will have to, you know, overcome and work through together. But that oftentimes I don't think is talked about internationally enough, what it does to like a people. And like that shows incredible resilience, because even after October 7th, like everybody mobilized. People that didn't go to the army helped out some other way. They fundraised, they got like military equipment from abroad. Like every single person was somehow part of the system. And now 2.5 years later, you still have like a whole country that's like supporting each other. But like the amount of strain and like mental, physical, emotional stress that has been put on every single person, whether they're in active duty or not, and a lot of them are, I think is an aspect that isn't, you know, discussed enough.
Getting to talk about such details makes me question, how do you see the international humanitarian law in this context? Like, did you guys feel, or from what you've witnessed, that the rights were respected normally? That basically even through the position and education and even like the rights of each one of the peers going through this and even having to be mobilized just like that, like how does that make you feel, the question of intervention and even like gesture, talking internally as a state of basically mobilizing young peers like that.
Yeah, so I will say, like I said before, what international humanitarian law on Israelis, because I don't think anyone has asked any Israeli internationally, do you have enough food? Do you have enough water? Medicine. It's like it's something that is obvious. Oh, the Israelis will take care of themselves, but the stockpiles that me and my family and my friends have in the houses, if things would go wrong. At the start of the war, people were buying generators because it was said that the war with Hezbollah will have no electricity for weeks. So I know people paid thousands of euros for a home generator to all their houses for electricity so they can survive. But it is never discussed in international media. And as I said, I can only speak from Israeli and my perspective. I cannot compare it to anything that's going around us, because I don't live there, but I live here. And I know the situation is, we've been scared sometimes, that, okay, I know organization as well who contact me through my connection. Oh, you need us to send containers. People in Europe, good friends, want to send containers of food. So some people cared, at the start of the war especially, to see that we have everything that we need. But I don't think it's discussed enough. It's like, are we, is international humanitarian law is for Israelis in a way? That's what I'm saying, because it's not discussed. Yeah, we can take rockets on us. Oh, they have the Iron Dome, but yeah, of course we've built Iron Dome and other systems in a way to protect us from these kinds of threats. But we've been living through a war as well. So from personal perspective, I know the rushes to the supermarket and you see all, it's fun in a way, because you go to the sweets section and you see all the chocolate is gone because people want comfort while they're in the bomb shelter. So they buy all the sweets and cookies and everything, so they can have something to snack in a way. Part of, feeling comfortable during a war, which is a lot of, psychological implications on. And sadly, I did the same. Buying cookies so I can have something to snack on during the war. But that's the situation we've been in. I don't think most people don't know what are, international humanitarian law as civilians. What? Oh, we have the right to have this and that and that. By international law. So yeah, so it's part of the education as well, or it's part of international. Okay, I don't think that it's. I understand why people look at people around us and say, okay, we're in a better situation than a lot of our neighbors, because we have an economy, we have military and everything. But as civilians, we don't really look at this. We just, people thinking about the next meal, about how they survive it. And I don't think it's been discussed enough on these rights to Israelis as a whole, as a country. Yeah.
I think it's a great question, and I feel like these are questions that, should be more directed to Tal, just because he can speak to it a lot more. But I do think that when I saw the question before, I really, really appreciated it, because I think, as Tal said, like, that is, for me, literally the first time I've seen that question being posed to an Israeli. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, and thank you for that feedback as well. And it was interesting how you're talking about things at the civilian levels, just basic comforts that can make people feel more rooted and feel comforted in times of conflict. And kind of drawing a parallel to one of the themes of our fellowship in general, in resilience, it's in academic circles and institutional circles in general, education is considered something that is paramount in maintaining long-term resilience and having individuals and civilians as a whole stay rooted in terms of maintaining this long-term resilience. How do you stay motivated in pursuing an education and subsequently a career during this period? And how does that kind of balance out in terms of prioritizations with you and your family's safety?
So I will speak. Or Lidia want to say something?
No, you go ahead first.
So because we cannot plan a lot of weeks ahead, I'm studying now for the bar exam. I should have started weeks before, but there was a war with Iran. And during the war with Iran, let's say I didn't get more of 3 hours of sleep a night. I don't know if any of you try to study for a huge exam with 3 hours of sleep at night, or you can say, oh, that's the richest problem, you cannot study for the bio, or you cannot, but as we said, if we're looking for education, and that's from my perspective, and I start to think about it, when the war will be over, so I can actually start to focus better on preparing for the exam, because if it would continue, I know that I would just, fail before I even tried. So, and then we were speaking about the people all over Israel, that schools were closed, I teach at primary schools and other schools, and it was closed, and I missed my students. I teach diplomacy, by the way, for primary and others. It's important from early age, I believe, to implement these ideas, but it was closed. And so kids are at home and they don't engage with the friends, so they can just meet with friends in the neighborhood. But same, you have an active war. I'm saying the war with Iran was more intense because they shoot these huge, massive rockets at us at civilian neighborhoods. So you see the situation of some neighborhoods are trying to build their own, one parent, everyone works from home, so one mother can take over of the children and try to teach them something during this day. But the thing with education is, for me, is there will be a day after. And when this day after will arrive, I hope sooner than later, I want to be ready, to live my life, but also in a way, I already know that, living through this war, and don't forget, it's like before that we had COVID for a few years. So think about it, Israelis since 2020 didn't really have a year of let's say quiet. So I know that I need to make the best of this time in a way for myself, which is very hard because if people are dying around you, all over the thing with the hostages, that we've waited for all of them to be released, which has a heavy toll on everyone. So from education perspective is, it was important for me to finish my studies in the university, and for all of my friends as well in the university actually was very helping for people who had other times, finishing it. But as I say, even these days, we have people in the north of Israel with the schools. I think it was a few days ago. The school was, it was a drone was hitting a school, which I'm not sure was covered internationally, because all of the north, or the war in the north, is not, in Israeli perspective, is not really covered. But you hear people again, saying we're going to keep our children in the house because because the education, is and there were videos of, you have bomb shelters in school as well, but when you have a siren, you need to run there. So you see like amount of just, children running to a bomb shelter. So I think it's interesting that the focus is on education, because we never, thinking about it as a right or something, because we just try to survive in a way. And yes, doing your education is a way of trying to find the day-to-day focus. So it's like, I have to study. Okay, I have something to do today when there's a war outside. That's my perspective.
Tal, since you brought this up and you talked to us about how everything comes to your daily routine, what do you feel like has been the most impactful thing in your day-to-day life? What has been the most difficult and biggest challenge for you, experience or example that you could remember?
Yes. War is a scary thing. Let's start like this. And you have days where we all thought if you are going to survive this in a way. When you see all of your family together in a bomb shelter, and your friends in the bomb shelter, everyone is in a bomb shelter, you're always like checking after it to see that everyone is okay. And I speak with friends all over Israel, from the south to the north, saying that it's okay. It's the difficult of a war in general is like, am I going to survive this? Yes, I'm in a better position than a lot of people in Israel, I can say, or in the region. But I'm looking at my personal situation, and I'm like, in a war, you want to survive. So you're doing anything you can in a way to succeed in this. And yeah, so there's been a lot of when I'm trying to think about specific moments, there's been a lot of situations. I remember, a devastating thing when the 6 hostages were killed in one of the tunnels that they were slaughtered by Hamas as captives. I knew I was in touch with one of the families trying to help them, and for me it was like one of the worst days of the war to know that they actually slaughtered the hostages inside the tunnels. But it's been it's like, of course, every time you see a name of a soldier in the news in the evenings, and we were saying in Hebrew mutar lepirsom, which is like allowed to be published. In Israel, you're allowed to be published for the public once the family knows. So you know that the soldier, the specific unit that goes to tell the family, like you see in the movies, that they come to the mothers and everything. So you know that the family is already knowing about it, and then the public knows. And sometimes I walk or I study and have the TV in the background, and I'm trying to say, is it a name I know or not? Sometimes after a few days, you realize, oh, it's a cousin of a friend, or it's a family member. So it's the day-to-day realization of we've been going through the war, and it's been difficult. And we try to stay positive in a way, but you can never know what will happen next. It's one thing, these days we are focusing around Iran. We have days, we're sitting in a bar with friends in Tel Aviv, and you're not sure if the war will start while you're sitting in the bar, in the pub and just drinking with friends. And it's the ongoing tension of things are about to happen. So that's the word is uncertainty. That was what the word I was looking for, is the uncertainty in life. For the last 3 years, you can't know what will happen, if it will restart, will start in another front. Yeah, that's the life of Israelis for these last 3 years.
Thank you for sharing a incredibly personal moment and kind of trying to illustrate what conflict is for you. The capacity to kind of understand this emotional toll being away from the situation is probably difficult for so many people to grasp. Do you feel like people outside Israel understand the emotional toll the situation takes on young people and people just they're involved in general? And this is a question for both of you.
Lidia, you can start, then I will say something.
I mean, I'll go back to something I mentioned earlier. I think many people understand intellectually that Israelis have been going through like tremendous trauma and war, but I'm not sure if people fully appreciate how collective that trauma has been for a country of the size of Israel. Like as I said before, Israel is tiny. People often joke that like there's only 1 or 2 degrees of separation from everyone else, and that is very true. So when something happens, it never feels distant. Most people know someone who was affected directly, someone who lost loved ones, knows a family waiting for news about someone they care about, like Tal just mentioned. And in larger countries, I feel like tragic events can sometimes feel either geographically or socially removed to a certain extent. But in Israel, the sense of community really goes for the entire country. And so one thing I have noticed in conversations outside of Israel is that people often view the conflict through like the lens of politics. And inside Israel, among many people connected to Israel, it is experienced first through the lens of relationships. So when you look, like when you watch the news or like the first couple days after October 7th, when we were watching the news, it wasn't about like who said what from the Knesset. It was about like what names are being mentioned, like checking in on friends, like, is your family okay? All of that. And before it becomes a political discussion, it is, a friend, a cousin, a classmate, a former colleague, a neighbor, a member of somebody's former unit or current unit. And so I think that that helps explain, both the aspect of resilience and the exhaustion that you see in Israeli society now. So like the resilience comes from an incredible sense of social solidarity. But the emotional cost of carrying that level of like collectiveness is for such a long period of time, like 2.5 years, is like an insane weight on everybody's shoulder. And so I think ultimately, resilience is often I feel like misunderstood as simply like enduring hardship, but it is really something about like continuing to build something and having such a strong collective identity and like feeling of responsibility during such uncertain times is both exhausting but also incredibly like reinforcing and I mean beautiful to see from the outside and like hearing it from friends and family on the ground. Tal.
Yes. So, yeah. Okay. So, I don't think most people around the world understand the toll on Israelis, and I don't expect them to, in a way, because as I'm trying to live my everyday life, people are trying to live their everyday life. So you guys are trying to finish your studies or whatever, plans for the weekend. My problem is when people do have an opinion on the situation and are not very educated enough for it or have no idea, and they argue with people who living through it. That's when my perspective is on understanding the emotional toll, because when they come to an argument about this with Israelis are coming from a perspective of this emotional toll, and the other people are looking at this from an outside story, for like watching a movie or watching a TV series with few episodes. So from this perspective, I don't expect people to care. I don't believe in this like overall caring of the situation. But when they do focus on it, they usually don't care about the emotional toll. They don't care about what Israel has been going through in a way. And sure, they don't have to. But when we try to understand the conflict, we can look at different perspective and at least listen and not lecture the people who have been going through it on the situation. And I've been abroad in Europe, especially a lot of times during the war started, conferences, meetings, whatnot, and a lot of the talks are from curiosity and people wants to understand. And personally, I didn't have any bad experiences, but when you see things in social media, on other places, it can be difficult to see why people see certain things as they are. Is it from pure ignorance, pure hate, pure not caring about the situation? But yes, Israelis have been through a horrible trauma for since October 7, and then they've seen the marches of, different protests, if you can call it protests. There are some are legitimate protests, some are not. When you march through a specifically Jewish neighborhood in the UK, trying to intimidate a specific community, I cannot agree with it. So I'm saying is the people who are trying to, who don't care, they don't understand, they don't care about, not all Jews around the world have a connection to Israel. That's one of it. Not all of them have families, but some of them do have families in Israel. And when we try to intimidate them, because I'm thinking about people outside, also have people experience it, and we have friends of Israel, a lot of friends who are Jewish, nothing to do with Israel, who I speak with daily. First of all, they try to see that everything is okay, especially during wars with Iran as well. And yes, so it depends on the people that I speak with. But I as I said, as I started to say, I'm not expecting people to understand the situation. But if you push yourself into the situation, listen. Some people think they're big experts. You see it all over, news channels, and you can see that they don't have no understanding what they're talking about this region, because you have so many different kind of peoples, nations, religions, whatnot, and it's complicated. Yeah.
I think it's also about empathy a lot, and people's capacity of understanding other one's suffering or difficult times. So I think this also comes a lot from the masses' capacity and the individual personal experience and also projection to understand how this could affect anyone's life. So it's something that I think all of us would have to try to structure, at least create a scenario and think, how would this type of actions surrounding us affect us, and in any of way. And at the same time, it's something that you kind of grow up with since you get to have a historical context like that. So what I wanted to ask you, Tal, was how do you feel this type of environment at a certain level kind of got to influence your perception and the perspective about conflicts and the conflict of Israel with any other country? How growing up and seeing and getting to be familiar with this type of situations got to create your perception or shape it in any way?
So growing up in Israel is pretty much normal, I can say, if we compare it to European countries. But you know that it used to be every few years we're going to have a war. Someone will attack. We're not sure from where, who, but we need to prepare. And of course, when I was younger, there was with the intifadas, when you had buses exploding all over. I was a little kid. I don't even remember it. I remember it from stories. And the Israeli perspective is very, I can say it from a worried place, and understanding that things can happen, and how can we, and that's something that you grow up on. A lot of Israelis are very cautious when it comes to unattended items around the city, because we had people are just putting, bags with bombs inside and then explode and kill people. So we are very aware if there's something which is weird in the landscape, we will call the police. And as a kid, it happened a few times that through my window, as I don't know, I was 8 years old, I saw this, they had these robots who come and explode from far. So you go up into this reality of there's a security threat. You're a kid, you don't understand the complexities of stuff. And it shapes you in a way that, that we as adults in Israel look and say, okay, all of us are cautious. I don't know if you met a lot of Israelis in your life. I know, I can speak on myself, we are cautious people in a way, because you can never know, and you see it especially for Jews in Europe as well. You cannot know what will happen these days. And I have a lot of friends in Europe, Jewish or not, and I speak with both of them about the issue of anti-Semitism in the region. But you can never know if you walk in the street. I'm saying about Europe, and someone will attack you because they think you're Jewish or whatever. So in Israel, it's a similar way. You can never know if there will be a terror attack. Thanks God, there were not terror attacks, no big ones in recent years, because we're dealing with other wars. So it's like people don't want a mix of that in a way. But yes, you understand that, as kids, we have drills for going to the bomb shelter, because they want to prepare the kids for going to the bomb shelter. And the bomb shelter is just, for the explanation, just one of the classes, just reinforced with better, like with more concrete. Usually a bigger one, like a conference hall in the school, will be the bomb shelter. So you go up into this. Then of course with 2014, when it started to come to Tel Aviv as well, the rockets from Gaza, from Hamas, and you start to see it get closer to home, because when 2006 in the war with Lebanon, I lived in the center. We didn't feel it. It was all over the north. So you had stories of people, families who live in the north, they had to evacuate. But you just go up on stories of, of wars, and that's the reality, and you understand how to act. So okay, there might be a siren, where to go over there's a siren, how to. So that's the reality of Israelis. And it's shaping the Israelis in, we can say, in a resilient way, because we know how to deal with the situation, and I'm sure in a lot of other countries, people will not know what to do.
I would be happy to add something, just because I grew up going to Israel a lot, so it never was something that really, seemed weird to me. But when I was studying there, we had a whole group of internationals that were doing their semester abroad or whatever at Reichman. And so like in Israel, for example, since, it's mandatory military service, a lot of people walk around in uniform, have their like service gun on them or rifle or whatever. And so that's part of like the public picture. And for example, for Germans, where like military is a, very touchy subject, at least before the Ukraine war, like I had a friend of mine and she was like, it's such a weird, thing for me, because I'm not used to seeing people in uniform and seeing people carrying guns openly. And so, but to me was always an aspect of feeling safety. Like I was like, if I, like being surrounded by people that have served, that like understand how to act in certain situations, to me personally has always conveyed more of a feeling of like, I'm surrounded by people that know what to do when things need to be done. Or like, when there's a situation that like, if you come from a Western European country or like the US, you don't really encounter in your day to day. And so I just remember distinctly like my friend from Berlin telling me, wow, this is such a such a new thing to get used to. But yeah.
Thank you. That kind of actually feeds into sort of the next topic we were going to go into. You have a really interesting perspective because you've spent so much time in Israel and then formative time in Germany as well, studying and working professionally, and now are working in the United States as well. And much of the work that you are doing is being touched by these ongoing conflicts and tensions. How has kind of these formative years in all of these different places, and then also the work that you're doing in DC, kind of shaped your perspective on this conflict?
Wow, that's such a big question. I mean, obviously there's a personal, aspect to it of like having family in Israel and like, I love the country. I hope that I get to move back at some point for a while. And I was brought up, like super Zionist, super proud, very like Israel has always been like my mom has been watching Israeli news in English, but like since I could think. And so it's been always just such a big part of growing up wherever we were living. And I would say, like, having lived in Israel and studied security issues, and always like maintaining close ties to the country, trying to go as regularly as possible, I kind of am aware of the challenges of, certain situations. But I would say working at JINSA really changed my sense of agency. Many people who care deeply about the conflict and aren't there in person, I would say I have felt largely as an observer, like following developments, checking the news, worrying about people, trying to understand what's going on, what's happening, but also like feeling very limited in my ability to contribute in a meaningful way. And so working at JINSA, I started in January, has given me the opportunity to really be part of the conversation of initiatives that I believe can make a difference, whether it's like helping educate military leaders or facilitating dialogue between like security professionals of both countries, or supporting policy research or strengthening relationships between like the US and Israel. I really feel like I can, connect better to like efforts that have real world implications. And one thing that has been especially meaningful is seeing how much impact institutions can have. So we often focus on like the political leaders, but many of the most important conversations, I think, are happening through relationships built over years between like generals in Israel and the US, and policymakers and researchers, and civil society leaders. And so I think it has been a very like empowering notion to see that coming all together. And it's making me more optimistic, at least when it comes to like the strategic side of things. Not because the challenges are like smaller, but because I've seen firsthand how like if you're really committed and you know what you want to achieve, and you have the right institutions on your side, there's a lot of change that can be made. And it can help strengthen resilience and improve understanding and really contribute to like a better outcome over time. So I would say like that's the main difference between like before JINSA and after JINSA is like the sense of agency. And just growing up internationally and talking to, getting to talk to so many people from so many different backgrounds, I think there is just a very like I'm very humbled many times, even like moving to the States, because I'm aware that the realities of people that I talk to are very different from mine. And so I think like what I've learned throughout my life is like this humbleness of understanding. I might not agree with something you're saying on a fundamental like value thing, but at the same time, I can't judge it or I can't say it's wrong because we haven't lived through the same realities growing up or like education wise, et cetera. And so I think that's something, I feel like, especially in a town like DC where people come to like change the world and like ambitions are high and everybody's super educated and it's amazing. But sometimes this like understanding of while you do have a lot of like intellectual knowledge, there is like the human component that like you just can't understand sometimes, and like that's fine.
Lydia, I like a lot the point that you made about people around us having different realities than we do. And I wanted to ask you both guys, how do you think other people around you do get to perceive reality and even like trust the institutions that they are led by or the ones that they are surrounded by? How do you feel like the context usually gets to put people in a position of doubt when it comes to various institutions?
I mean, I'm happy to kick it off, but I think Tal can speak much more directly to like the lived experience of young Israelis today. What I would add from my conversations with friends and family and colleagues in Israel is that there is often like a distinction between trust in political leaders and trust in the Israeli society itself. And I think like that's generally something when we talk about the news too, that like I feel like sometimes globally people have a hard time making that distinguishment between this is the government doing what they're doing and the society is a whole, like these are two different buckets. And so many people may be critical of politicians and specific policies and government decisions. And I think, you know, that's the beauty of living in a democracy as much as, you know, it's challenging sometimes and you don't always agree with whoever is in the administration, like whether it's for me in Germany, for people who are in the US and Israel. But I think that there is like the beauty of living in a democracy is that you can voice that and that you're able to have a very public debate about what should be done instead, what you disagree with. And so I think, you know, at the same time, it remains a remarkable level of faith in Israel, at least in the importance of the state and the military and like local communities and civil society organizations. And so I think like seeing that balance between like very, you know, public outrage about the politics, the government, and then also like a very stern like support and belief in the like societal systems is incredible. And one of the things that really impressed me after October 7th was how quickly, I also touched on that earlier, like ordinary citizens stepped up and filled all the gaps, like organizations, supported networks, volunteers, helped each, like everybody was helping one another. And that suggests that even when confidence in, you know, your military leadership might be challenged, the social cohesion is really strong in Israel and has remained really strong even throughout the past 2.5 years. And so I think, yeah, I'll hand it to Tal here for the more personal perspective.
Yeah, so I agree with Lydia in a way of, you know, if we speak about the institutions, I touch the institution as institutions. Do I always touch the politicians or in charge of this institution? No. And that's the current situation with the current government. In democracy, you know, we have elections and people get elected, then we have to wait for the next elections. We can try to protest, we can try to do different things in between. But generally, I trust a lot of the institutions in Israel. I don't really trust the people who are leading these institutions. I don't agree with a lot of, say, most of the policies and what they decide. But it's a democracy. You know, I'm the flaws and of democracy and the good thing in democracy is, and that's the situation. So yes, so in Israel, I think you can see it in the polls as well. They actually divide between, you know, support and trust for the military, for the judicial system, for the government. You can see that the government doesn't have a lot of support these days. You know, we're going to have elections soon, in a few months, and let's see if it will change. And if not, you know, we have to live with it. It's a democracy, but hopefully it will. But yes, so you can see that the institutions, I'm saying in a way that you know, as we differentiate from the government, it's, you know, the different institutions. Some Israelis will trust more than others, and there's always politics in between. And the thing is, politicians come and go. Some stay more than others. Strong institutions stay, and Israel has very strong institutions. If it's judicial system and others, ministries and so on, and them you can call them the autopilots. These are the professionals who are staying, and politicians come and go, and they are the ones who steer the boat. And of course, you have clashes between the politicians who come there for 4 years term, to try to lead the ministry. But I think in general, young Israelis do have trust in our democracy and in our system.
Thank you for that. And that kind of also goes into the idea of maybe with the institutional trust and the avenues for making change that comes at this youth level. Do you feel that students and young people today have meaningful ways to make their voices heard? And if not, Lidia, kind of to you, what are some of those ways that you think would help people feel that they have those avenues to make their voices heard?
That's a great question. And I feel like I will not do it justice because it really depends on where you're at geographically, like what system you're in, what country you're in. Are you close to like the capital or like wherever the decisions are being made? There's countries like France where you're either in Paris or you're not in Paris, and like that's the main difference. And then there's countries like Germany where obviously a lot of the political decision making is being made on like in Berlin, but then you have like all the economic strength like in the South and in the West. And so I think, I will try to answer this question as best as I can. But it really depends on where you are. One thing I would encourage young people to remember is that like influence, for lack of a better word, is often much more accessible than it appears. And so I think once you have a clear vision of, or you can articulate what you're, wanting to establish or fight for or whatever, then it is easier, like then there's so many avenues to do it through. And so when we think about making our voices heard, we tend to focus on like national politics, but in reality, many of the ideas and relationships and initiatives eventually end up in like on the national politics like level, are a lot closer, like start a lot more local or more like closer to the constituents. And so in Israel, I believe there's many avenues for engagement, and I'm happy to like let Tal talk about that aspect. But I would broaden it beyond Israel. And one lesson I've learned, especially also like doing grad school here at Georgetown, and obviously like DC is also such a, vacuum, like such a power city when it comes to politics that it's hard to say if you're somewhere else it's going to be the same. But one experience that I've learned is that the influence does not always come from being the loudest voice in the room. Like sometimes it comes from building expertise, doing the research, creating relationships, and like really understanding the issue and the problem that you want to address. And by like having those conversations and diving deep, you really like start building trust and earning trust over time from people in the field that you then want to influence. And so as a student, I became involved in like community leadership, for example. And then today through my work at JINSA, I also, contribute in different ways by helping facilitate dialogue and engagement. And so for young people that try to make a difference, my advice would be to, start where you are, understand what you want to like achieve, understand the issue that you need to tackle in order to achieve it, and then just like start talking to the right people. And those people don't need to be like on the highest level of national politics or like enterprise, but just like build an amazing like ecosystem around you, and keep having like expert level conversations, and that will really like pave the way to it becoming like a bigger topic of conversation amongst you know, like experts in the area.
Yeah. So you want to continue?
No, but I wanted you to talk about IDI a little bit.
We'll get to that. So in a way, yeah. So there are a lot of meaningful ways in Israel to make the voice of the young people. Part of it is IDI, the International Diplomacy Initiative, the NGO I founded and lead, and that's a way to give young people voice in diplomacy and the skills and tools to understand cooperation, diplomacy, what does it mean, and so on. And we've been doing it for 5 years, and you see people that go to different places around the world and continue. So if it's in politics, we see a lot of this time a lot of young people being put on the list of the upcoming elections. We can see, if they want to their voice be heard, open social media and everyone is there. And with all the influencers, in a way, I'm saying a lot of people are critical about the government, are pro the government, and so on. Freedom of speech. So, part of this, of idea of being heard is, it's like either you want to change something, you want to keep something going as it is, and there are a lot of ways doing it, in a free, open democracy that we are allowed to do, which not a lot of countries, we sometimes don't, recognize the freedoms we have, and that we can speak freely about anything we want, basically, in the limits of freedom of speech, because every country has it differently. But yeah, if I want my voice to be heard, there's so many. I was part of a foreign correspondent for a youth news thing in Instagram, article and so on. So there's so many different ways. If if people want to write or speak and talk, from 1 million podcasts that there are in Israel about different topics of young people, and we like to speak. So people are being heard. They speak. They are being heard, and yeah. So the problem is, ultimately, it's not the problem. It's like they can continue to speak as much as they want, and that's the reality we live in. And of course, different ways to do it. As I said, there are so many different ways, and yeah, that's that's my perspective.
And when it comes to involvement, for example, what kinds of international involvement, whether from the US or from other countries, do young people from Israel think or would feel that would be valuable in moments of tension and moments of external conflict? What's something that you guys think could be really insightful, or something that could kind of make the peers around you feel better in a way, if that's something correct to say, or even like never lose hope, I think would be something that could be more important for the ones involved and affected by this kind of situation.
Yeah, so I will answer to that, and yeah, a lot of times when I have talks with people abroad and friends, and when I visit you, it's like don't give up on us, and I do think that there should be more international involvement from Europe in this region in Israel. I think it's a lot of opinionated people in Europe sometimes just say what's good and bad, and they don't give, but what do we do about it? I understand you're frustrated, I understand you support, you're against. How can we work to change the situation if you're so upset about it? And there was a great conference of that by the EU delegation to Israel a week ago, by the way, in Jerusalem, speaking about, Europe's more involvement in the region and in Israel. And I think that's something that should be talked more about. Because we see, what are our close allies. I know sometimes in Europe, especially since the war, some people try to distance themselves from Israel. But we're living the same, with the same kind of life, same allies, same blocks. In a way, when you look on the broader map of geopolitics, we're here. We're very close to you. Used to be, all of our families are from the region, most of us. So in a way, it's like, yes, I will be really happy to see more European involvement, because we rely a lot on the US. If like whenever we speak with, it feels sometimes when you speak to European leaders, and when I see people speak and so on, there's a lot of big no-nos. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. You should. It's like there's no really of. Yes, but what do we do about it? Yes, you have the old plans of resolving different conflicts, but how can you be? How come whenever we need help or something, we go to the US, and we don't come? We go to Germany is a huge ally, is the second most important for Israel, and of course, go. But when you look at France and the UK and other countries who are deciding to be more against Israel in a way, and they think, oh, we're just doing it against the government, but it affects all of the civilians as well, and everyone who lives here. In a way, it's like, how is your actions actually affect the situation on the ground in a good or bad way? If it's just something to say to the press, okay, you have your own constituencies and you need to say whatever. But it feels that that we have these specific countries in Europe that we can speak with. A lot of them are like, I don't want to speak about Spain and others, or that's for another call. Or they really, it feels sometimes that they focus especially on Israel to divert attention from other things that are happening in their countries. So that's how I see it.
I'm just gonna add a tiny little bit, because I feel like Tal covered very well the country to country kind of dialogue and cooperation, but I think on a more societal level, educational exchanges, dialogue initiatives, academic partnerships, like having universities partner for a semester or year exchange, professional opportunities where global companies help you if you want to move to another location, like say in Israel for a couple months, that's facilitated. Anything that helps the people to people connection, I think is really important. And so, because that's where people are being reminded that they're part of a larger international community, that's where you actually get to have these conversations like we're having today, where you get to understand the realities that a person is living through in in a war environment or in crisis situation, whichever. And I think we've seen this over and over again, relationships are really what outlast political moments. As Tal said, politicians come in, depending on the term length, we're used to 4-ish years. They try to make as many changes as they can, for their constituency. But the relationships that you build between people is really what going to be outlasting any political moment or whatever is going on, goes over the noise. And I feel like those relationships are really what makes or what creates a foundation for long-term resilience. And so I think while ultimately the country to country cooperation is really important, on a more societal level, I would love to see more companies and more just organizations being engaged in the person-to-person exchanges.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And we're getting into the close of the interview portion. We're going to, in a little bit, turn the recording off and open it up to Chatham House rules where you can feel free to speak more freely on things that are not going to be recorded. But before we get into that session, we just wanted to ask if there was anything that you felt was overlooked or misunderstood that you would want to share on a more broader scale. And this is for both of you as well.
Yeah, so I think a lot of things which are misunderstood, it's that there's a ongoing war in a way. People look at it from the perspective of living away, living abroad, criticizing, which I accept, saying that and this, the complexity of the situation. Most people are not expert or don't understand military strategy, planning, geopolitical strategy, engagement between different countries in Middle East, Israel, Europe, there's so many different moving parts. And a lot of people are overlooking it and misunderstanding that it's a war to manage. And sometimes, they say, oh, why? I see it a lot. Oh, why Israel is like not checking that and not doing this? It's like a lot of things we question as well as Israel is why things are not checked in this way or another way. But it's like, I'm not saying it shouldn't be checked. It should be checked, but it's like there's an ongoing war. And when you have a very limited, forgot the word, but very limited ways, to do things in general, and you need to allocate allocate the ways and needs and the means that you have. It's a complicated situation, and sometimes people see it in the news and say, oh, okay, there's a war going on, but they don't understand the complexities. And I'm always telling people there's complexities. There's so many different moving parts inside the Middle East, outside the Middle East, all over the world that affect each other. Lidia?
It's so funny. I was going a totally different route. So here it is. I actually think, and this is not contradicting what Tal said, it's just like a different perspective on the same thing. I think oftentimes when like people globally see Israel in the news, I feel like Israel is only in global news when there's war, when there is a security crisis, when there is political controversy. And so oftentimes I feel like when people, have no other connection to the country and have only ever like seen it on the news, like that's the immediate association that comes up for them when they hear Israel. It's like conflict, it's war, it's, controversy. And so I think on a, since we're doing this for like a youth resilience project, I think it's really important to think about that the people that live in Israel, like there are not solely defined by conflict. Of course, they have to, be especially resilient to deal with these, situations that come up and like military conflict that comes up. But like you can't just think of a whole country as and define it with conflict. And so, like young Israelis, they're students, they're entrepreneurs. There is incredible like technical developments coming out of this tiny country. They're artists, they're researchers, they're like anything that we are too in other societies. And they worry about the same things as we do, obviously, especially currently in a different context. But their futures are just like young people's futures anywhere. And like, at least like that's what they're hoping for. And so, they're carrying a ton of responsibility and experiences that many of us who don't grow up in Israel or the Middle East have never been confronted with and probably never will. But I think it's often overlooked that there isn't only hardship, but it's also like incredible resilience that comes out of these situations. And I wouldn't say it's resilience, as toughness or the absence of like pain, because like the trauma is very real, but resilience as like the decision to keep building and learning and creating and like planning for, a future despite uncertainty, like Tal has said. And so if there's anything I would love for anybody that like listens, to take away from this conversation is that resilience is ultimately about people. And while, a certain country might be in the news for, like Israel might be in the news for very specific things regularly, I think the perspective of seeing a country for like the people that inhibits it, and like for everything, like having a more comprehensive perspective onto a country. I think that's the that's the secret in understanding resilience and in understanding other people's lives and just being more receptive to different perspective.
I think that is very useful for everyone listening to the discussion. And I think that's something we should take as a key element every time we do get to analyze as well issues in a certain area and try to better understand how to intervene in certain contexts of needs and conflict as well. And this is why I wanted to thank you guys very much for giving us explanations and answers in such a detail that we get to have a huge and very wide perspective and key points of how we should better be resilient in the context, but also how to interpret and do better get to understand certain moves of actors as well as institutions. I think the personal points were very useful for the ones who are not used to those kind of contexts. And I thank you, Tal, again for these examples, which were very personal, and we can agree to that it was very important for everyone, and it should be very important for everyone to get to understand the point, at least hypothetically. And Lidia, thank you so much for getting to give us so many factors that we should consider as well every time we do get to shape our perception about certain contexts. And now we're going to switch the setup roles. And again, thank you very much.